Epilogue. Back to the future. It's 30 years since I was married, 30 years since my father died, and 30 years since we lived on what is now referred to as a North Belfast interface. A great deal has changed in my life since the day last year that I climbed up Divis Mountain and decided to write this book. Both of my beautiful daughters have moved away to live in England, and my mother passed away exactly 2 months ago. I returned to the summit of the Black Mountain a few weeks ago for the scattering of her ashes. My mother was 83 years old when she died and had suffered from cancer for the last 10 years. Every day for the past 2 months I have replayed the final hours of her life in my mind. We held her hand, mopped her brow, played songs to her, comforted her and prayed with her. We told her not to worry about us. We said it was okay for her to let go. And most of all, we told her how much we loved her. On the night she died, I felt I needed to take something of hers with me before I kissed her goodbye. I lifted the Bible that always sat on her bedside table and took it home with me. At the back of the little black book, I found a small plastic wallet with an assortment of fragile, yellowed newspaper clippings which had been carefully cut out from the death notices of the Belfast Telegraph over a period of 40 years. Death notices for my granny and granda and all those dear family and friends that had passed on before my mother. But then I came upon a very different piece of paper. A small scrap of blue paper with torn irregular edges folded over once. I knew immediately what I had discovered. It was my father's suicide note, scribbled in pen and with familiar smudges from the tears that stained the ink, exactly as I remembered it from the first and last time I had read it on the 20th of May 1986. I was shocked. 25 years ago, my mother told me that she had destroyed the suicide note because a counsellor had advised her that holding on to it would prevent her recovery. I had believed her. As I drive along the motorway, lost in my memories, I take the wrong exit. My navigating skills haven't improved much. I am endlessly grateful for Google Maps. I'm aware that I am still grieving the loss of my mother, but this bereavement feels different. I've only ever lost a parent to suicide before. This is a different type of grief. I don't feel guilty. I'm not angry with my mother. I'm not feeling guilty for feeling angry. I'm not trying to recall the warning signs I missed. I'm not blaming myself for not doing enough and for not being there that morning. I'm not tortured by the thought of the desperation and unhappiness that led to the death. I'm not confused and shocked and shaken to the core. I think back to my experiences of 30 years ago. Unlike my mother's recent passing, my father was in the depths of despair and alone in the final hours of his life. There was no one there to hold his hand or mop his brow, to comfort him or pray with him. There was no one there to tell him how much we needed him, to beg him not to let go, and to tell him just how much we loved him. I still think of my father every day, and the fact that he took his own life is a part of me. I don't want one more woman to experience what my mother went through. I don't want one more son to experience what I went through. Today, I volunteer as the chair of the Board of Trustees of Contact, a counselling charity that provides a 24-hour telephone lifeline for people in crisis and despair in Northern Ireland. I believe that every suicide is preventable up until the last moment of life, and today I do what I can to contribute to the goal of zero suicide in a city with an unacceptably high rate that is partly a legacy of the Troubles. Later this month I'm going to give the opening address at a major suicide prevention conference in the new Titanic Conference Centre in Belfast. I'm holding on to my idealism. I'm still trying to make a difference where I can, hoping my contribution will help to reduce loss and suffering. However, over the years, I've become more of a pragmatic optimist than a zealous idealist. I'm not as naive as I was in 1986, but I've worked hard over many years in peace building and social action to avoid becoming cynical. We were in such a state of shock at my father's funeral that we just wanted to survive the day. But my mother's funeral was a good time to say goodbye to both of my dear parents. My father's memorial tree grows taller every year in the gardens at Roselawn Cemetery, and in the next few weeks the rest of my mother's ashes will be interred there to be with him forever. I often reflect on all that my father missed out on over this last 30 years. He never got to see me married. He missed out on the joys of meeting all his beautiful grandchildren. He didn't get to enjoy the fruits of his labours in the foundry, such as his son becoming a successful author. He had no idea that people of different ages and faiths from different countries would one day say, "I really liked your father. Your father was a strong, independent-minded man, and your dad must have inspired you." My father would never hear me reply 30 years after he left us, "It's taken me all this time to work out that he inspired me more than I ever imagined." As I drive through familiar Belfast streets towards Clifton Park Avenue, my mind returns once again to that night in 1977 when my parents won the ballroom dancing competition in Butlins in Mosley. I play their song, The Last Waltz. As I turn into Bruceville and arrive back at that little house, I have an image in my mind of my parents reunited, holding hands and dancing again, a last waltz that will go on forever. I have automatically parked exactly where I used to leave the rusting Renault 5. I notice that all of the graffiti on the wall opposite the row of houses has been painted over with purple paint. No more INLA or IRA or KAP. In fact, there are no obvious signs to claim that this street belongs to one side or the other. It immediately feels normal, lighter, and less oppressive than I remember. A young woman passes me pushing a high-tech buggy, and two children are happily playing a game in one of the tiny gardens. The sun is shining through the clouds, and a gentle breeze blows autumn leaves along the road. Some of the houses still have the original windows and doors, but most, including our former little house, have new white PVC frames and doors. The houses at the end of the row have no broken windows and have a pleasant outlook onto a green space. But 20 years after the IRA ceasefire, there is still the peace line. The reality is that this tiny park serves as a visually pleasing barrier to the other side. On the other side of the railings is a fence, and then another fence, and then another one. So many fences! As I turn onto Clifton Park Avenue, I can still see the footprint of the long demolished cats' home at the rear of our old house. All that remains is grass and a few of the trees where thousands of cats once climbed, but the site is completely surrounded by a high metal fence. I remember the Robert Frost poem, Mending Wall, that I studied in my English class at Belfast Royal Academy just around the corner. Good fences make good neighbours. It was an ironic line in the poem, but Belfast has taken it literally. The reality is that good fences make mistrusting neighbours feel safer. But it seems very peaceful here this morning, and I feel no fear. It appears that the people of North Belfast have settled for peaceful coexistence with reassuring fences rather than choosing to integrate and flourish together without barriers. Frost wrote, "Before I built a wall, I'd asked to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was likely to give offence. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. There is something within me that hates a wall." Years after the Good Friday Agreement, it is clear that replacing solid peace walls with fencing is regarded as progress in Belfast. If you can see the other side, you're more likely to consider them human beings just like you. I suppose that's a good start. As a result of living here, I went on to work in peace building across many other interfaces for many years. And in 2008, I wrote a discussion paper proposing a 5-phase process for removing peace walls in Northern Ireland. A few people, keen to keep the segregated status quo, responded predictably. A North Belfast MLA proclaimed, "Them walls will never come down." Several judgmental North Belfast community workers who were busy polishing their weapons in 1987 when I was living here and bringing young people together on this peace line asked, "What would your man know about living on the peace line anyway?" And a member of the staff of the government-funded Community Relations Council for Northern Ireland asked who the fuck I thought I was. However, in spite of the naysayers protecting their various fiefdoms, my proposal was well received by most people, including many of the elected representatives, who acknowledged that these walls are also barriers to jobs and prosperity in the poorest neighbourhoods of Belfast that suffered the most during the conflict. Today, due mainly to a huge amount of work by youth and community organisations over many years, it is now the Stormont government's policy to remove all of the peace walls by 2023. That's a dismantling I will enjoy. But it will only happen when the people living beside them feel safe enough. I understand this completely from my own personal experience. The removal of the wall in Clifton Park Avenue, albeit to be replaced with 1 million fences, is a big step in the right direction. As I look around me, I noticed that the fences are separated by a patchwork of well-kept lawns. That really sums us up in Belfast. Stubborn steel fences and beautiful green grass. The best of us and the worst of us, side by side on the peace line. Green grass representing the softness and beauty of this land, and black metal fences representing our steely ingrained divisions. In spite of the fences, the things that strike me most are the wide open spaces and the newly built Girdwood Community Hub. The army barracks with its massive perimeter security wall and searing spotlights is gone. In fact, today you can see the whole way to the rear of Crumlin Road Jail, now a top tourist attraction. The £20 million Girdwood Community Hub has been hailed by Belfast City Council as a state-of-the-art shared space hub which offers first-class leisure, community and education facilities. Inside is a multitude of shared spaces for local people from either side of the fences to come and interact with each other, if they really want to. It's an ambitious project, and I hope it works. The politicians are still fighting over whether the remaining vacant land around it should be used to build Catholic houses or Protestant houses, because there are still plenty of votes in fighting for denominational housing for your own side. Today, the community hub looks pretty empty. Once the not very state-of-the-art fences all around the state-of-the-art shared space start disappearing, we will know that all this money has been well spent. My vision is of shared streets around this hub with no fences at all, and I don't care whether the houses are Protestant or Catholic or even state-of-the-art, as long as good people are once again living together as neighbours in an integrated community without fear of the other side. With this expensive symbol of hope in front of me, I walk back and forward across the peace line several times. I feel no sense of danger here at all today. It's an imperfect peace, but I feel a strong sense of hope for the future from the obvious progress in my former neighbourhood. I walk towards the front door of our former house and peek through the familiar black diagonal wooden fence that I once painted every year. There's a satellite dish and gas piping on the outside wall, bringing natural gas and satellite TV into the house where once only coal and 4 analogue channels were received. The tiny garden is only half the size it was in 1986 because now the house has a pretty conservatory and stylish decking attached to it. When I lived here, I was more concerned about getting a very different kind of decking in that back garden. The house is bigger, more attractive and safer today. However, Now I notice how close together the houses are. In the 1980s, this gave a sense of closeness and security, but today I feel a little claustrophobic. I decide to walk around the corner to retrace my daily walk to work at the Salt Shaker Centre on the Antrim Road. The area on my right-hand side is bright and open space without the huge brooding barracks. I can see the whole way up to Divis Mountain. There is no sign of the Troubles except the faded pink Control Zone end sign on one of the lampposts. During the conflict, this sign indicated that you were leaving a control zone and that you could now park your car. Most of the streets around Girdwood Army Barracks had been control zones to prevent car and mortar bombs. This forgotten and outdated sign reminds me of the strange give way sign I spotted on my trek to the top of Divis last year. This is no longer a control zone. The military may well be gone, but so many of the housing estates in this city are still under the control of gangs of men who have controlled them for decades and who still brutalise anyone who dares to disobey them. I'd love to see the end of these control zones too. I'd like to see every neighbourhood given back to the ordinary people who have suffered enough. Many local residents feel the same way about the paramilitaries, even if they're related to them, but feel powerless to speak out. They really have to watch themselves round here, you know. I arrive at the former Dunkern Presbyterian Manse and Church. It's an incredible sight. The 174 Trust is still going strong, and the old church, long closed as a place of Presbyterian worship, has been transformed beautifully into the Dunkern Centre for Culture and Arts for all of the people of the city. I've been back here before at cross-community youth initiatives, music concerts and peace conferences. I've even given a few book readings here at Scribes at the Dunkern, which is part of a fantastic community-based reading initiative of which I'm proud to be a patron. The centre has also become a genuinely shared space where everyone has a voice and feels respected and welcomed. Lesley, Dave Moser and I have returned here for a few reunions where we met some of our former youth club members. It was good to reconnect and to hear how they have created good lives for their families. I enjoyed hearing about their jobs, the achievements of their children, and stories of how the youth workers at the Salt Shaker influenced their lives at a time when so much was stacked against them. Maybe our short years on the peace line made a little difference after all. Living here had a huge impact on me. It has led me to the belief that neither a utopian United Ireland nor a beloved British Ulster was worth a single drop of blood. I'm disturbed when I hear histories of the Troubles which justify the violence and airbrush the sheer bloody brutality. I've concluded that every precious human life destroyed was worth 1 billion times more than either nation. On this day, I'm feeling ever more hopeful when I turn the corner onto the main Antrim Road. The British Army Watchtower has been replaced with a sunbed tanning studio with luxury apartments above. When I arrive at 174 Antrim Road, I find it is now a taxi depot and attractive-looking flats. A lot has changed in 30 years, and most of it for the better. As I return to the car, it starts to rain. I feel teary-eyed thinking about the loss of my parents, the loss of so many young people like Billy, the loss of my own idealistic youth. I'm feeling deep love for the young woman who moved here with me in 1986 and who is still my wife. But I realise that most of these are tears of joy. I'm feeling more hopeful than I expected. The continued divisions in this city frustrate me hugely, but today, here and now, all around me, I see more signs of a hopeful future than of a brutal past. I dry my tears and drive off in the direction of the Crumlin Road. As I pass the jail, I wonder whether any of the construction workers involved in transforming the prison into a tourist attraction found a pair of red plastic 1980s lady spectacles hidden under the floorboards in Shamey's former cell.
On my right is the Crumlin Road courthouse where my father's inquest was held. It is the exact opposite of the jail, burnt out, ugly, derelict and neglected. This section of the Crumlin Road is a good representation of Northern Ireland today, in part transformed, with some aspects stubbornly unchanged. The naive idealism of 30 years ago was knocked out of me back then, but not my faith or hopes for a better future and for a city without walls. Today, I still believe in the possibility of a land where our children and grandchildren will live together in the same streets and play together on the same teams. I dream that one day the children of this city will learn together in history classes in the same schools about something called a peace line and structures called peace walls that once divided their beautiful, thriving city, but now are a sad and distant memory, and that no one has to watch themselves round here anymore.